Welcome to another episode. Today we're going to be building a Captain America shield. First off, I modeled a two-part shield in Lightwave, and I also modeled a base. This was printed using my Raise 3D N2 printer. I'm taking out all the support material that was on the inside of the outer shield. And it's time to print the other side. I'm just sharpening my chisel here so I can use it to take off some of that material that'll be wedged together a little bit later on. Here's both halves, and you can see that support material gets wedged together. So it's time to glue it together using some 30-minute epoxy. I made a little registration line here to make sure that the parts go together correctly. Using my handy dandy clamps that I printed a while back, I clamped that thing together. I printed the base as well, and here's just a little test fit. It fits great, but I think I'd like it leaning back just a little bit more, so I just made the adjustment and printed another. I guess we don't need this anymore. I made a nameplate for the base in Illustrator, then sent it to the laser for etching and cutting. And after a little cleanup, it looks good. I also gave the base a few coats of gloss black. And it's time for some more epoxy. Turned out pretty good. Using some Vallejo plastic putty, now I'm going to fill in some of those seam lines from the two parts going together. I like to apply it, then just use my finger to kind of smooth it out, then come back a little later with some sandpaper. And this stuff shrinks, so you might have to do it a couple times. To get a good coating on the shield, I'm going to use some Duplicolor adhesion promoter first off, and then come back with a few coats of filler, and that will smooth out some of the 3D printing lines that are in the shield. I gave it about 40 hours and then came back and did a little more sanding, and then a couple more coats of priming. Using my airbrush, I'm just getting rid of some of the dust that's on there from all the sanding. And it's time for some priming. I always seem to get better results when I put down a thin coating first and then build it up gradually. A lot of people just cake it on and get good results too, but I prefer this way. Because we're using metallics on this, a black base coat is going to give the best results and make that metal really shine. I'm going to be using some frog tape here just because I have it available. I used it a few episodes ago on my Colonial Viper and it didn't have the greatest results, but I'm going to give it another go here. Before, I had it on a plastic canopy and I left it about a week, and when I peeled it off, it left all the sticky residue behind, which was a little bit of a pain to get off later. So hopefully I'll have better results here. It's also important to note that anytime I'm using airbrush paint, including this primer, I'm going to come back with a layer or two of matte spray just to set it in place, especially if I'm going to put some tape on later. I definitely don't want it peeling off. And time for some silver Vallejo model color, and I'm going to thin it down with some airbrush flow improver. As usual, I'm putting down a thin coat first, and especially when you're using masks, you don't want to go too fast. The paint will saturate the tape and kind of creep under it if you go too quickly. So definitely take your time here when using masks. Instead of using a whole bunch of tape, I'm just making a little mask here to go over that, and I'm going to tape it down. Next up, it's time to paint the blue part. So I'm going to use some Vallejo Model Air blue, and I'm going to mix in some metal medium to get some nice shiny flakes in there. It's a little hard to see in this shot, but it does have a little bit of metallic shine to it. So it is time to peel off the masks and see what we got. And it's looking pretty good. Next up, time to mask off the red part. And if you haven't guessed it already, we're going to use red, again mixed with that metal medium. Again, it's a little bit hard to see in this shot, but it does have a little bit of metallic shine to it. Because I want to protect the base coat and all the work I've done so far, I'm going to coat it with XTC 3D by Smooth On. And this is just a liquid coating that you can put on your 3D parts. You can mix it by weight or volume. I usually like to use weight, especially if I'm mixing up a small batch. The ratio is 100 part A to 42 part B. So I just multiplied by 1.42. And then fill it up as close as I can to that amount, 13 point whatever it was. And got a little bit over, but it's okay. When you're mixing any kind of resin, you always want to stir, scraping the sides and the bottom, and try to stir out all the air bubbles if you can. This particular resin is endothermic, which means that the greater the volume, the greater the heat, and the quicker it cures. To maximize your work time, instead of dipping right out of the cup, you can spread it out on something like this, a little bit thinner, and you'll get about another like 5 minutes or so working time. This material is pretty easy to use, however, it will destroy your details. I'm using it just to get a nice smooth coating. I don't want it glossy smooth, which is going to be what it turns out to be. I'm going to sand it a little bit later, but I really want to protect my paint surface, and then I'll come back with a little bit of sandpaper and smooth it down a little bit. I'm going to do a pretty good amount of battle weathering to this, so time to dull it down a little bit. We want it metallic, but we also want it to look like it's lost its sheen from scratches and so forth. just using that metal medium that is thinned down a lot, I'm going to go over the whole surface just a little bit, just to give it just a hair more shine to it. It's really hard to see what's going on here, but it is adding a little bit of shine to it. I'm going to use some Panaline accent color to start weathering this. I'm going to just glob it on and come back with a paper towel and just kind of wipe off the excess. This will take a few coats. I'm doing this kind of sloppily on purpose just so I can kind of blend those colors together. And I'm going to use a little bit thinner material, which is this Vallejo Model Wash, to sponge on some dirt and grime. And it's really important to dab off all the excess, otherwise you'll have a mess. This does lighten a little bit as it dries, so you'll want to come back with a couple coats. I'm going to have a few blast marks going across here, so that's what those streaks are going to be. And using the sponge, it's pretty important to vary the angle, and you can also squeeze the sponge and get a slightly different shape. I also like to drag it to create lines. You can get a lot of kind of free detail there, just as long as you don't have too much paint or wash in the sponge. Using some Vallejo metallic silver, it's time to come back and accent some of these marks, and as well as add some little scratches here and there. Some of these darker areas that I sponged on, I'm just adding a little bit of contrast with this silver, because when paint chips off, it usually has a dark kind of undercoating, and then you see the silver underneath. So that's what I'm trying to simulate here. Using an X-Acto, I'm adding a few more scrapes here and there. And a little bit later, I added some wash to a few of those to make them kind of dark scrapes rather than light. Here we have the final front side, so it's time to flip it over and move to the back. And of course, we're going to use some Tamiya Panaline accent color. Again, I'm being pretty sloppy with this on purpose so I can wipe it away and leave some dirt marks and grime, that sort of thing. The Panaline accent color is enamel based, and I made the mistake of not letting my primer dry long enough, and it's actually coming off a little bit. However, it actually looked pretty good, so I kept on doing it on purpose. For the straps on the back of the shield, I'm going to use some leather. So time to cut it in some strips. My leather punch was having a little trouble going through the hole, so I just sharpened it up a little bit on the belt sander. And these are pretty easy to use. You just put it in place and hit it a few times with a hammer. I'm just test fitting some rivets that I bought, and it looks like it's going to work well. Normally you hammer these together, but I found that a pair of pliers works just as well and is a little bit more controlled for this anyway. After I've got all my strips cut out, it's time to put them together using these little buckles. And they seem to turn out pretty good, although they're brand new looking, so we need to do a little bit of weathering. I used that same Vallejo silver, but mixed in a little bit of gray in here to dull it down a little bit. I'm going over some of that brass and also the buckle to give it a little bit more of a shiny metallic look. And a little bit of dry brushing to make the other parts a little bit silver and stand out from the rest. Again, with the silver, I'm just coming back and adding some scrapes here and there. It's looking pretty good except for the leather, which looks brand new, so let's add a little bit of Vallejo model wash to it. I started off with some dark brown, but quickly went to black because after it dries, it lightens a little bit and you really couldn't tell the brown was there. And with that, I'm going to call it done. Here's how it turned out. Thanks for watching. Be sure and press that like button and don't forget to subscribe. See you next time.